like to begin by thanking our friends at Citizens Bank for graciously sponsoring this morning's breakfast. As you know, Citizens is a longtime, very active member of the New England Council, and we are grateful for their continued support. In particular, I'd like to thank my friend, Ken Robinson, who serves on the New England Council Board, and will introduce our guest in just a few moments. It's hard to believe that it's already April, and we have a very busy spring planned for the New England Council. Just in the next week, we will host two of New England's region's governors, Governor Sununu tomorrow in Manchester, and Governor Healy next week in Boston. We also have a variety of other Capitol Hill gatherings planned in the weeks ahead, with guests including Representative Stephen Lynch, Representative Bill Keating, and Representative Annie Kuster. We'll be back here in Providence next Thursday for a very special final Capitol Hill gathering with Congressman David Cicilline, who, as all of you know, is retiring from the United States Congress. We do hope that many of you will join us in thanking the Congressman for his outstanding service, not only to his district and state, but to the nation. And of course, we're now just over a month out from our 2023 Washington Leaders Conference, and we hope that you'll join us for what promises to be a very informative and fun 2 days in our nation's capital. We have over 200 New Englanders already registered, and it probably will be a record-breaking attendance in 23. And to all of you who have signed up, we say thank you. Thank you for your support. And again, I think you to enjoy the 2 days of meeting with members of Congress, meeting the United States senators, such as our guest here today, as well as people from the administration, people from the media, and all in all, very informative 2-day session. As always, you can find more information or you can register for any of these events on our website, newenglandcouncil.com. But today we're honored to welcome back the senior senator from this wonderful state, Senator Jack Reed. To introduce him, I am pleased to turn it over to Ken Robinson, the head of Government Relations at Citizens Bank.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the New England Council for all you guys do, your dedication to each state, in particular, in this case, Rhode Island. And thank you to Larry and the rest of the New England Council team who do tremendous work putting these together. And as Jim noted, I mean, there's just slews of them that take place, and what a great venue for us to be able to hear from our elected officials in a comfortable and relaxed setting. I'd also like to thank my colleagues from Citizens Bank, Keith Kelly, our Rhode Island Market President, Kathy O'Donnell, our Head of Public Affairs, Michelle Hecht, our Head of Corporate Affairs, for joining us here today. And I was at an event recently. It was a political fundraiser, and there were two people introducing the program, and the first person spoke very briefly and turned it over to someone else who looked shocked that they'd been asked to speak. And then they proceeded to give like a 15-minute introduction, which they had clearly spent hours working on. But I'm not going to do that today because I don't think Senator Reed really needs much of an introduction. Senator Reed has dedicated his life to public service as an Army Ranger in the state Senate, in Congress, and in the United States Senate currently. As you guys all know, he's chairman of the Armed Services Committee, which is very heartening to know that someone of his seriousness is in that position in these dangerous times. Obviously, that involves the passage of the NDAA Act, which is fundamental to our nation's defense. The senator obviously also sits on the Senate Banking Committee, and we always thank the senator for his thoughtful engagement on banking issues, and in particular, your staff is tremendous. I mean, I was just saying to the senator, I speak with his folks on a regular basis, and it's always heartening to know that, you know, in times of uncertainty in banking, we often get calls for them to check in to see how the bank's doing. We can assure them that we're nothing like Silicon Valley Bank, knock on wood, and that things are good at the bank. But today, I'm going to be brief, as I said, and turn it over to the senator. I think there are a lot of people would be interested in hearing what you have to say. We also, as I mentioned, feel like you always have an open door to us on banking concerns. We certainly appreciate the fact in your efforts around consumer protection and your understanding that oftentimes banks have different levels of protection than our non-bank competitors, and establishing a level playing field on those matters are really important to us. So I guess without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Senator. I'm sure Jim will facilitate a lively Q&A at the end. But again, thank you everyone for being here today. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Ken, for that very kind introduction. But more than that, for your great leadership and service at Citizens. Citizens is an incredibly important part of Rhode Island. I took my first Citizens account out when I was 5 years old at St. Matthew's School. Banking week. Every week we brought a dime from home and put it in the Citizens Bank. And if I had not spent it, I'd be a happier man today. So anyway, thank you for Citizens, et cetera. Jim Brett, thank you, Jim, or as we like to refer to him as Harry's other brother. Harry's the more popular Brett. But the New England Council plays a very important role in not only the dynamics of New England, but national policy. I can remember first elected in the House, and we worked closely with the New England Council to repeal the sales tax on boats, because our boating industry, construction industry in Newport and all through the Northeast was suffering. We got it done, and it was a collaborative effort. That's just one example, and we're moving forward. I'm here really to listen to your comments and questions. I'll learn a lot more that way, but let me make a few points. Two major points first about the bank situation, the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and then also the debt ceiling, which is absolutely critical. SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature, their failure appears to be contained. I must say I think the administration moved swiftly and adroitly to stop it. We first got indications of a crisis on Wednesday afternoon, and then Thursday they were trying to make it to the weekend, but the outflow was so great they had to shut it down, which is unusual. Typically they do it on weekends. And then they had to reassure the public very quickly. And there was a series of telephone conversations with banking committee members and Treasury and the FDIC and other agencies, and it was concluded, and I think rightly so, that they would provide coverage for all the depositors, and they would also open up a special window for other banks who might be facing a run. That stopped the immediate unraveling of our financial system, and frankly, I think the containment has been satisfactory, to say the least. I've talked to the New England bankers and the Rhode Island bankers. They have not seen huge shifts of deposits moving around. That phenomenon was cut off. So I think the administration did a really great job in stopping the bleeding. Now the question is going back and preventing a further occasion like this. And we're looking very closely at some of the problems. First, there are significant management failures. It appears that they did not really have a risk officer for the last year, all through 21, that they were told by the Federal Reserve their risk model was wrong, and they didn't change it. They were several times criticized privately by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, but they ignored it. And the question, of course, that we have to ask is what more should the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco do to avoid this situation? And we're pursuing that. Michael Barr, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury for Regulation, is taking the point on this, and we're going to get a report back. And we're going to start looking at legislation. I mean, one of the big issues, obviously, would be, do we essentially guarantee all deposits in the bank rather than the $250,000 limit? And that's a very interesting debate that we're going to have to take on and resolve. Obviously, if we do something like that, we're not going to have the customers pay for it so much as we are the industry, because that's only fair. And it'll probably be apportioned more to the larger banks than the smaller banks, because, again, that's only fair. Community banks typically don't have these kind of very sophisticated business models they're pursuing. They're out there trying to lend money to people buying homes and buying cars and things like that. So we're dealing with that. Our critical goal, obviously, is to protect the banking public and maintain confidence in our banks. One of the interesting things about the pandemic that I think most people missed is the strongest institutions during the pandemic were our banks. And that, I think, was a result of Dodd-Frank. They were well capitalized. They had been well regulated. So when the nerves and all of the angst about the economy and supply chains and everything else, the banks not only were stable, but they were able to deliver the PPP program for us. And that they were, we suddenly brought them into the fold as an extension of the federal government, and they moved out with their clients and got the PPP money out. The first round was a little rough, but the second round, we really focused in on making sure that small businesses, minority-owned businesses got their share, and it was much better. And we came out of the pandemic with an economy that was still expanding, slightly, but expanding. And now we're looking at an economy about 3.6% unemployment. We haven't had that level since 1969. I go to businesses every day. The one major complaint where I can't find workers. I can't find workers. I can't find workers. I've been in the past at businesses and say, I got no business, so I have just laid off all my workers. We're coming out of this. We have to maintain the momentum. And at the same time, the Fed has to fight the inflation that was generated by the pandemic, mostly supply chain disruptions. We're beginning to get a little bit better. Inflation is coming down, but it's still around 6%. That's too high. We have to get it lower. And it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off because their only tool they have is the federal interest rates. And as they raise those, it puts pressure on lending and other things. But, I think we're in a better shape than I thought we would be 2 years ago when we were looking at an economy that was collapsed. Basically, it was gone. No one was at work, et cetera. So we are going to take a look very clearly at the deposit insurance system. We're also going to look at whether it's appropriate, I think it is, to claw back bonuses and dividends and things from bank managers who have been incompetent, it might be one word, or at least negligent. And that's something we'll pursue also as not just a quid pro quo, but an incentive to be better, i.e., I better run my bank right, or else I'll end up paying out of my pocket. So that's something else we're dealing with. The Banking Committee is working on legislation, and we should have that legislation in the next, I would suspect, the next month or two. And then the question, of course, can we get it through? And that's always a challenge. But I think there's a bipartisan sense that we should take steps, that this can't be ignored. And so that's our direction with respect to the bank situation. With respect to the spending ceiling, if you think the failure of a mid-sized bank was going to cause the whole world economy collapse, you ain't seen nothing yet if we don't pass the debt ceiling. It will be a disaster. And everyone knows that, even those folks on the other side who are saying, oh, we don't need to do that, et cetera. This would be a huge blow to the world economy, not just the American economy. Since January, the Treasury has been using extraordinary measures to keep us going. Those measures would likely run out the first week in June. So we have to have an agreement between now and June. And the agreement can't be premised on well, quid pro quo. You give me that, and I'll give you this, et cetera, et cetera. This is something that's an obligation, I think, for the Congress. These are debts we've already accrued. If you want to cut out the debts going forward, then you do that in the budget process. You don't do that by jeopardizing the credit, not just of the United States, but of the whole world. Let me make it clear. We're only asking our colleagues to do what we did. We passed a debt ceiling increase 3 times on a bipartisan basis under Trump. Why can't they turn around and do the same thing? We had this fandango about 2010 when the 2011, when the Republicans took over the Congress and they refused President Obama's request to raise the debt ceiling. And we came up with this elaborate sort of exit, which called the Budget Control Act. We ended up wasting more money on the Budget Control Act than we ever saved. There's only one thing to do, the responsible thing, which is to raise the debt ceiling. And I would hope that you would take that message back to everyone you know. There are not a lot of Republicans in New England, but if you've got friends elsewhere, no, I'm serious. This, if when the business community says you're going to destroy my business, they'll listen more than we say it's the right thing to do. They kind of nod and thank you. So I honestly urge you to do that. If we only have a few weeks breach, we go into some gray area where we're not quite sure we're going to pass it, et cetera. Moody's has indicated GDP will fall by 4%, which is, we're into a recession headed towards a depression. The stock market would drop by 1/3. So guess what? We've got banking problems again because all that collateral you thought you had versus your liabilities, you don't have it anymore. And it'll eliminate about 6 million jobs. So that's just foolish to even entertain the idea. So we're in a situation where we've got to raise that, and I urge you again to get the message out. It's not, shouldn't be partisan. It wasn't partisan when we were working under President Trump. It was the right thing to do. So those 2 issues, I think, are the points that I wanted to just talk to you about. Let me also add that part of the issues, as always, reducing the deficit, reducing the national debt, critically important. It turns out that the Inflation Reduction Act, which we passed, has projected debt reduction by about $300 billion over 10 years. And the president's budget he sent up this year has $3 trillion of deficit reduction in terms of his proposals. So there's a serious effort on the president's part to reduce the deficit. That's just good government. You want to gradually bring down the deficit as you continue to expand opportunity in the country. And we will do that. Just saw some numbers indicating that we track the life of Medicare. Is it going to last to 2033? Is it 2031? It's actually gained 2 years because one of the things we did last year in the Inflation Reduction Act is we now are negotiating with pharmaceutical companies the price of pharmaceuticals. Yeah, but thank you, Ian. But we have been doing this at the VA for 20 years. And what happens? You go to the VA to get your medicine, and it's a copay of $1, and their system operates very well. When we get that fully engaged in Medicare, we're going to see significant savings, and based on simple economics. You've got the product, we've got the customers. Let's talk. Okay, this is the price we'll give you, and that is going to be significant. Already, we've seen with insulin, we were able to, for Medicare recipients, cap the price at $35 a month. Insulin was created in about 1920. The developers were so generous, they did not insist upon a patent. They made it available to everyone. So it's not a new super drug based on millions and trillions of dollars of research. And the price was up, in some cases, up to $400 a month for people on Medicare. Now it's $35. We did it, and we tried to do it for all Americans, but our colleagues, Republican colleagues, wouldn't let us. But guess what? The pressure was so intense on the big companies, Lilly and the other companies, that they voluntarily reduced the price of insulin to $35 a month. So we're seeing, seniors are seeing a real cost savings right now. And those are the things we can do, and we should do. And they won't harm I think the economy. In fact, they'll benefit the economy. So I could go on, but what I'd like to do right now is stop and take your questions. And thank you very, very much.
We have time for a few questions, and maybe I'll just start with one or two. Senator, you talked about the deposit issue and trying to maybe protect all depositors with their savings. There was some discussion with some of your lawmaker friends that maybe the FDIC fee should be based on the unauthorized investments in the bank. Your thoughts in addressing that?
No, I think that's a good starting point. If you look at a bank's profile and they have highly risky investments and other things, then you could establish, just like a regular insurance company. You know, they walk out and they look and say, oh my God, you've got this and this, and you don't have any fire doors, and guess what? Here's the bill. You go to someplace else and say, you know, you guys have really got every modern, safety device, and here's your bill. It's much less. So I think that's a principle of insurance, and we should look at it that way, particularly if we're going to raise it above the $250,000 limit. That's part of the dynamics and sort of the technicalities we're going to be looking at here.
Being the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, would be remiss if you didn't ask a couple of questions on the military. I believe the administration yesterday authorized another $2.5 billion for Ukraine, ammunition, and other equipment. I'm just wondering about our own stockpile. I'm just questioning, do we have enough for ourselves in the stockpile with equipment and ammunition for any future conflict that we have? And is that an issue that you're concerned with?
No, we're very conscious about our operational requirements. And so we are not providing the Ukrainians with any system or ammunition that would deny us the ability to carry out our operational plans. That being said, we've seen a huge pressure on our industrial base of the military in terms of ammunition. What we're doing now, too, is we're providing them HIMARS, and Glimmer is actually the rocket system that goes with the HIMARS. We're providing those systems. We're providing them Abrams tanks, et cetera. We have engaged the industry to try to increase their production. So one of the interesting aspects of this is that in a year or two, our military will be getting better tanks than we have right now, because we will give our tanks to the Ukrainians, not jeopardizing our security, but what the new tanks would come in are a better model. So that's the dynamic we're looking at. But one of the things that really we're constantly looking at this is that our military industrial base is very fragile, and we have to build it up. One of the things we did, and this might be just dumb luck, but in 2017, I, along with then I think John McCain and I, but this was sort of my idea, and you'll know why. I decided that we had to reinforce the submarine industrial base. I don't know why. I like submarines. So we started putting $100 million a year, and that was designed to go in and to train workers. That's why if you've been down to Wesley, to our training center, we have a superb training center that takes young men and women, and not so young men and women. I was down there, was a 60-year-old guy who was going to work at Electric Boat. Training, we emphasize. Then we emphasized going to the subcontractors and making sure they could really produce the equipment at high quality, et cetera. And until the Navy took it over, Congress put $700 million into that. So our submarine industrial base is much more vibrant, stable, and resilient than it would have been, much, much more so. Now that's become the model for the rest of the Department of Defense. They're looking at what do we have to do in the aviation sector to help the subcontractors, et cetera, and training. So that's one example, but we are really gearing up to do more production of ammunition. And the final point I'll make in this is that we operate or have been operating under the principle that a war, a conflict the United States would be engaged in would be rapid, and the ammunition would not be that significant in terms of our use. Because we look back as much as we look forward. And if you look back at Desert Storm and Iraqi freedom, and even the first phases of the Afghan operation, the ammunition was never a problem. 2 weeks we had done. Now we're seeing a different type of warfare, where essentially it's World War I all over again. The Russians have dug in. They have very poor troops. They can't maneuver the troops. They can't control the troops well. So what do? You stick them in a trench, and then you tell them charge, and they get decimated. But the constant volume of ammunition going back and forth is staggering. So this has caught us, I won't say by surprise, but it's a shift in the operational techniques we were anticipating. At the same time, we're looking at Ukraine. We keep an eye on China and Taiwan, and that's another sort of situation. But the bottom line is we understand, and we're beginning to take steps to really build up our military-industrial base ammunition, not just in the United States, but in close allies. Great Britain, Canada, Australia, NATO countries, etc.
The Freedom Caucus just released their budget, and they want to keep the defense budget at a 22 level, which would come out to $78 billion reduction. Obviously, that is something you're going to fight very hard against.
Well, I mean, my Republican colleagues in the Senate, that's nonsense. They've already dismissed. In fact, they've criticized the president. His budget has a 3% increase for defense and a 4% increase for domestic. But if you look at it, half the budget is defense. So 3% of $800+ billion is a big chunk of change. 4% of something, department to department, is not that much. But anyway, the Republicans in the Senate reject that. And I think in the House, the problem there in the House is that majority of Republicans understand that they have to raise defense spending and probably raise domestic spending too, just to keep up with the demands on both sectors. But you have a situation where there's 20 or 30 people who are, I'll use the words of one of my Republican colleagues in the House, crazy. And they have incredible leverage on the Speaker, because you probably recall that they passed a rule that says any one member can go up and challenge the Speaker and require a new vote on Speaker. That was in effect when John Boehner was there as Speaker. And John, I served with him, we got elected together, and he's a character, but kind of a reasonable, he's conservative, very honestly conservative, but let's make a deal, we got to get this done, et cetera. And he was being threatened by Mark Meadows at the time. And Meadows basically said, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to revoke this thing. And John said, basically, I won't say what he probably said, but he dismissed this and he said, I'm retiring. Yeah. So he retired. And he's down drinking cocktails in Florida on YouTube. So if you want, not true. And I'm saying to myself, "What? You're an idiot. But no, but McCarthy is very, very weak, and it's hard for him to so he has to put up with this at least this chorus in the background. But we have to, on our side, there'll be an effort. In fact, the opponents of raising the budget are on our side are Democrats. So,
You know, Russia is saddling up to China, and China is saddling up with Russia. If China ever gave equipment, ammunition to Russia, is that crossing the red line? And if it is, what's the U.S. response?
you know, this has been a very difficult process because initially there was a tremendous concern that the Russians would use tactical nuclear weapons. And we were very, we calculated that constantly. We didn't want to cross the red line. And so far, and we've worked our way, I call it a battle rhythm, where we do a little bit more, but not enough to provoke a extreme reaction by the Russians. And, gradually we're building up and up and up. On the ground in Ukraine in the next few months will be critical. There'll be an offensive. If the Ukrainians are successful, it could have any number of consequences. One, the Russians could decide we got to find a graceful way out, probably not as probable as other, or we've got to do something even more radical, or we just have to keep throwing troops in. With respect to China, I mean, the red line is hard to define. And I've come to learn that drawing red lines is very difficult. Remember, President Obama drew the red line in Syria and lived to regret it for many, many years. It's a much more nuanced situation that, okay, you do this, you don't do that. And honestly, you've got to recognize some of the things that China has done in its self-interest that have benefited us. When China came out and said the use of nuclear weapons would be unacceptable, that sent a stronger message to Putin than anything we said, because that's the only fallback he had. Now, they did it for their own self-interest. They didn't do it for the Ukrainian people or anything else. China is trying to take advantage of this situation. First, they're trying to understand it. What does this mean for us in a conflict with the United States and Western Europe? I think we've sent a couple of signals that are very disturbing to them. One is the way the whole world community came together economically to try to cut off supplies. China's looking to saying, that's my market. If they shut off my market, I've got billions of people that are going to be wondering where their paycheck's coming from. I don't want that. The other thing they're looking at is the Russians, and they're saying, oh my God, I think Xi probably looks at his generals and say, I bet his generals told him this was easy, like you guys are telling me it'll be easy, right? Yeah. China has not fought a conflict since 1978 against Vietnam, and they got their butts kicked. So they're very much better military force today than they were then. In fact, they're very sophisticated with their technology. That's one of the areas we're concerned about. But I think Xi is looking at this and saying, this thing in Taiwan will be harder than I think it is, because this looked easy for Putin, but it wasn't. So there's all these factors. But China is a wild card. They are more dangerous for us in the long run than Russia. They are determined to exert their full power in the Pacific, push us out more or less. We can't tolerate that, not only for nationalistic reasons, but also for international principles, trade, and access to other countries, and freedom and democracy. That's a big deal. It should be for us. So this red line thing, but to date, to your point, China they bought all the oil they can get as cheap as they can, but they have not provided any significant military supplies that we can trace. And that's a conscious decision they've made to,
We have questions from the audience, obviously, and just identify yourself, and Griff here will recognize you.
Can I say a word too? I've got a lot of distinguished colleagues in the room, but I want to shout out to Teresa Paiva-Weed. Teresa was the president of our Senate, I think the first female president. So Bravo.
Good morning. Joanne Sullivan from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. Senator, as always, thank you for your support of our member institutions and our affordable housing programs. Just turning back to the banking issues, both FDIC Chair Gruenberg and Treasury Secretary Barr have said that they're doing a study on what the situation was, what went wrong, and what went right. And I think they're coming out in May with
Yes.
those. Are there particular items or issues you would expect to see in those two studies, and how might they affect the legislation that you're working on with your colleagues?
Well, I think what we'd like to see is first an analysis of the mistakes that the bank made in terms of management. So that would be a good primer for everyone in the banking industry about what not to do, et cetera. Then second, and more importantly, is why didn't the Federal Reserve prevent this? Was it too lax a regulatory atmosphere? Was that produced by regulations that could be changed? Was it a result, frankly, of the 2018 legislation? And do we have to make changes there? My sense is that there's going to be no serious attempt to repeal 2018. It's just what changes do we have to make there that, and frankly, with legislation, that's what you do. You try to get it right, and then you try to make it better in the future. But the report really is just, for us, is going to be what can Congress do and what can the regulators do under our direction to prevent any type of these exposures. There's one aspect of the Silicon Valley Bank that we have to worry about, and this is somewhat novel. In the good old days, when Jimmy Stewart was running the bank, all the people gathered in the lobby and demanded their money, and wait, and Jimmy would give a great speech, and it would be over. One of the reasons that Silicon Valley Bank was such a explosive and unanticipated is because of social media and electronic communications. This run became a stampede. Normally, in the past, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we probably could have handled this because it would have been, four guys on the golf course. I'm worried about Silicon Valley Bank. Really? Okay. Oh, hey, get out of Silicon Valley. This, not four guys playing golf, but 1,000 people automatically hearing on their email, oh, Silicon Valley's going down. We have to think about that. How do we deal with that? And that's an issue that transcends banking. That's an issue of just this wired culture. And that is frankly, that's affecting everything we do. When we think about social policy now, we have to think about, how is this going to play out when it hits the internet? So that's another issue. We're looking for some guidance from the regulators and from Michael Barr particularly. Yeah. Hey, Ken.
Chris O'Connell from Webster Private Bank. So there was a great article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, and I was hopeful that you could comment on it. And it talked about 4 different areas in which a survey was done. Patriotism, strikingly low right now. The second one was religion, incredibly low right now. The third one was community, incredibly low right now, and all dropping over the last 20 years. And finally, family, having children, incredibly low. The only area that was increasing was the interest in money. Of all the things. And I was wondering, that's so important to our country. You and I share the same alma mater. Mm-hmm. We share the same kind of values of this country. It's what this country was made on. Can you comment how you and all senators and other politicians are looking at this change, perhaps?
Yeah, no, I think, we are definitely in a different generation than the ones that we grew up with, and certainly the ones of our fathers and mothers. The point I just made about electronic communication. I've got a 16-year-old daughter, so I do some clinical research on this. But no, first of all, the pandemic has created long-term effects. Some of those effects were sort of weakening the social bonds. For 2 years, you couldn't go out and play with your friends. So in 2 years, you couldn't do anything. And I think generationally that has had effect. Less effect on old folks like me, but even an effect. I know, in fact, I'll ask you, I don't think people go out as much as they used to before the pandemic. It's just they got used to, hey, this is comfortable. I'll stay at home. I'll watch. I got the huge 70-inch TV set. So the technology is allowing people to distance themselves, particularly young people. I mean, they've got that phone right in their face. They're Twitter constantly. They can communicate electronically where we had to go physically and see people and talk to people. That's one factor, and it's profound. And no one has an answer yet. We're trying to figure out what do you do about that. I think the other factors, it is disturbing about patriotism. It's reflected, too, in the recruiting problems that the military has, and police departments, and other agencies. Part of it, I think, is that, and I'll put the blame on my generation. Our fathers and mothers, they sacrificed through the Depression, through World War II. They all served. They all had a common bond of service. And also, profoundly, particularly for those who served, they knew people that didn't come home. And they weren't going to be, jerks. They were going to vote because guess what? Joe died, so I could vote. I'm going to vote, and I'm going to make sure my kids do that. Our generation has been very, enjoyed prosperity, almost automatic. Everyone's going to college, everyone's going to get a job, and that was happening. You get a car, a house, etc. And the consumer, going back to liking money, the consumer aspects of life overtook the community aspects of life, I think. Then you've got a situation, too, is if you look at, success, a lot of young people say, well, yeah, I know what success is. You're an investment banker on Wall Street, and you own 4 homes, and you make, $50 million a year. That's what I want to do when I grow up. And that's not what was prompting a lot of our contemporaries who said, well, success, well, Jesus, serving the nation, doing good things like that, that's changed. So we're in a new world, and it's something we have to deal with. I mean, from a practical basis, we have to reverse recruiting in the military. And there are a couple of factors there. One is, and this demographics might be destiny, we only have a small base, about 200,000 people to recruit from because of the intellectual and the physical requirements. And it's harder and harder. And that's the other thing, too, is that, we now have a generation where, you don't, when I was a kid, most families had 6 or 7 children, and, et cetera, particularly if you were Irish like this guy. But now, it's a much more, 1 or 2 children and very, so there's a whole dynamic shift going on. And it is affecting our commitment to the country, to service, particularly service. And also, we have been caught up, frankly, in a political rhetoric that disparages institutions in the country, disparages the FBI, disparages the military, disparages, and kids are out there saying, if this guy says it's so bad, don't bother me, I'm going to just play video games. That's hurting us too, and we can change that by changing the rhetoric. The other thing too is that we have to re-engage. That's why I've been working on a bipartisan basis to try to recreate a national service. It's not going to be a draft because, frankly, we don't need 1 million people. And many of the young people couldn't qualify anyway because of physical reasons, et cetera. But we have to get a national service again because that's one of the big things we've lost. When I was a kid, one of the reasons I went to West Point is, at 7, I had to sign up for the draft at 18. I was going to go in the service. I might as well take that route. In fact, along with Abby Hopp and a few other people, I'm one of the few people that never signed up for the draft because I was already in the Army. But that's a change. So if you look at these social factors and stop and sit back, it's not in a way surprising you're seeing this, but it's not acceptable because without a strong sense of community, we're not going to be able to succeed. And if you, one of the things that we're very emphatic, and this might seem like a small point, but we are doing as much as we can to invest in libraries. And one reason is libraries are community centers. They bring people together. I was down yesterday at the West Warwick Library. They were talking about how, for example, in Warwick, they have a library truck that goes out. But it also linked up with the community agency in Warwick. And so they'll bring food. So you come for the food, you get a book. Guess what? You read a book. They have and walking into the West Warwick Library, every week they have a partnership with their social service agency. They have another agency in the lobby promoting. Yesterday, it was 988, the suicide number, prevention number. And by the way, when we talk about this generation and all this stuff, mental health issues are much more severe now. They are. And that probably correlates with, I don't like with the community, I don't even like myself, et cetera. I think that's an issue we have to deal with. There are practical ways we have to deal with it. I think if we could, the investment in national service to me is worth whatever reasonably cost. And I think we've got a serious mental health problem that are affecting particularly young people, and we've got to deal with that. And then we've got to rebuild community. And you do that through things like libraries, reaching out, community groups reaching out. But this is a serious issue. I'm not denigrating it.
Hello, Senator Eric Johnson from ISO New England. We run the power grid. First of all, thank you for your service to our country. Rhode Island is a leader in offshore wind, first offshore wind project in the country, and obviously there's plans for a lot more. Appreciate your thoughts on energy. What among the bipartisan infrastructure bill or the climate law is particularly important to New England? And is there anything else on your mind that we need to do at the congressional level to support the clean energy transition?
Yeah, no, I think I'm very proud of what we've done in Rhode Island. We're leading the nation in terms of offshore wind. And one of the reasons we did that, which is a model for other states, is that years before we actually started building the wind project, CRMC did a zoning, if you will, of the offshore waters. And they established where the fishing grounds were. They talked to the fishermen. They talked to the Narragansetts and other indigenous people. So they had the whole thing mapped out, literally. And so we were able to build without a lot of controversy. Massachusetts is still trying to get theirs in the water, and they started at the same time we did. So that planning is a good sort of lesson for us, that if we put planning money into the right hands and we get the plans, that's good. In terms of what's going to help Rhode Island, I think a lot of the benefits that we've tried to build in through the tax system for home appliances that are energy efficient, for heat pumps that are much more efficient. Just moving away from hydrocarbons is going to be very, very good for us, both in terms of climate and also in terms of cost. Anyone who has an electric car, anybody got an electric car here? How much money are you saving, Al? $60, $80. Thank you very much. It makes common sense. I think we've broken through, because when you have a waiting list for Ford F-150 electric trucks, they're not being bought by little old ladies on College Hill. They're being bought by farmers and everybody else. My pal John Tester, who's from the Montana senator, he said everybody he knows is trying to buy electric farm equipment. Why? Because they're saving $1,000, $2,000 a month. And also because they're easier to maintain, fewer moving parts. So that's going to be help. We have the plan to provide interstate charging stations. That will be helpful. I think also in terms of public buildings, we can start investing in those buildings, particularly schools, and start seeing savings, real savings that can be transferred to instruction, school equipment, et cetera. So there's a whole long laundry list of things that I think are beneficial already. And as we go through, we'll discover even more things we should have done or shouldn't have done, because it's both sides of the equation. But I think we finally broke through with the Inflation Reduction Act, because for years we've been trying to get minor sort of incentives for alternate energy, and the industry stopped us cold. We finally broke through. We've got the incentives, and those incentives, I think, will be taken by industry and the private market and accelerated far beyond what we could do by directing this and directing that. The biggest thing to me is when the automobile companies basically said about 2 or 3 years ago, by 2035, we're all electric. Don't bother us. We're going electric. And that was because, I'm told, you can build an electric car with half the number of people than you need for a gasoline car. And the maintenance is much better. So they're smart business people. They're looking ahead and saying, we can, through attrition, lower our labor costs dramatically and produce a product that is more reliable, better, and also good for the environment. But I think good for the environment is probably second or third down on that list. Anyone else?
One last question here.
Senator.
The Chinese are opportunistic. They're taking advantage of circumstances. But second, and this is where they have been much more focused and much more committed than the United States, they have diplomatic activities all over the world. And we don't have the kind of State Department response, both in number of people, number of programs, et cetera. The ambassador down there, or we may or may not, because we've been so bad at getting ambassadors in place and other State Department personnel, but we have not been as aggressive. And this is different than the Cold War, because the recollection of the Cold War is that we saw the Soviets as an existential threat in every level, and we had to counter them. So when they tried to get into a country, we went there too with both feet, economic aid, assistance. And I will tell you a story. I was up in Afghanistan at the big dam up there, which was hydroelectric plant, I can't think of the name now, and walking along, and there I saw painted on the rock the USAID symbol from about 1955, because we built the dam for them. We were doing those things, and China is doing those things now. And we really have to, I think, recognize that, put resources into not just military activities, but diplomatic and social activities. We have to do it all across the globe, because it's not just, as I said, they're threatening Taiwan. No, they have ground tracking stations in Argentina, which is getting data, which I suspect is not just for weather forecasts. They are trying to establish a naval base on the west coast of Africa, because if they can, then one of the submarines can go undetected from there to the United States. They can't do that now. So this is a very serious challenge, and they've been methodical. They put resources behind it, et cetera. Now, having said that, they're not 10 feet tall. They have some severe economic challenges at home. They have a huge generation of senior citizens that can't work and they have to deal with. Their banking industry makes Silicon Valley look like the best-run bank in the world. So they have problems. But they are pursuing this international effort still, and we're trying to come together now, get our ducks in a row, get the resources there, and go in. The good news is that most everywhere we go, people want the U.S. Our brand is much better. But if we're not there or we don't have the resources, they're going to turn around and say, yeah, sure, buy the port. I want. But that's we're working on that every day, and we haven't got it right yet, but we're still working on it. Well, thank you very much.